My beloved child, it is not by chance that you are hearing this message at this very moment when your heart is just calm enough to receive it, just wounded enough to understand it, and just mature enough to no longer respond in anger. There are moments in a person's journey when heaven chooses to speak not with thunder or grand signs, but with a deep inner confirmation that says, I have seen everything. This seeing is not hurried, not biased, not swayed by rumors or appearances. It is a penetrating gaze, one that sees through motives, through shadows, through the masks constructed to conceal true intent. When you were attacked in silence, when whispers behind your back tried to bend the truth, when quiet schemes were arranged in hopes of pushing you off your path, heaven did not turn away. The silence of heaven is never a sign of indifference. It is the patience of justice, waiting for the exact moment to reveal itself. There are those who mistake delay for dismissal. They believe that if their actions are not stopped immediately, then they have been permitted, that if consequences have not yet arrived, they are safe. But divine order does not operate on human urgency. It operates with absolute precision. Every intention formed, every word spoken with the aim to harm, every calculated step designed to derail another's life, everything is recorded within a system no one can erase, no one can alter. Heaven does not require evidence supplied by human hands, for truth is self-existent. Within this order, no act is too small to be overlooked, and no scheme is too clever to escape the light. What you call long nights without explanation, heaven calls a season of gathering. What you call injustice, left unresolved, heaven calls the preparation of a perfect judgment. When you stand amid ruins you did not create, when you ask why integrity leads to isolation and why honesty becomes an excuse for others to exploit you, you are not abandoned. On the contrary, it is precisely in such moments that heaven's sight becomes most acute. Not a single tear falls into emptiness. Each one falls into a living memory where pain is transformed into testimony. Every time you choose not to retaliate, not to strike back, not to lose your essence in order to even the score, you are bearing witness not before humanity, but before a higher court. That choice places you under a form of protection the aggressor cannot touch. There are battles where victory does not come from speaking louder, acting harder, or proving right and wrong before the crowd. Victory comes from standing firm in the light while darkness exposes itself. Heaven's seeing does not only record wrongdoing, it also affirms your worth. You are not targeted because you are weak, but because you carry something that unsettles darkness. Light does not strive to dazzle, it simply exists, and its presence alone forces darkness into exposure. Those who seek to harm you do so not because you are wrong, but because the life within you highlights the emptiness within them. From that silent comparison, envy is born. From envy, motives become distorted, and from distorted motives, harmful actions are justified through self-created narratives. But heaven is not deceived by narratives. Heaven reads intentions. And it is intention, not surface appearance, that is weighed. There is an unchanging principle within divine order. To touch what is preserved by the light is to place oneself within the realm of judgment, not because light seeks revenge, but because order must be upheld. When someone deliberately violates that order, they do not merely harm another person, they challenge the very foundation upon which all things are set. And when the foundation is challenged, the response does not come from emotion, it comes from law. For this reason, heaven's intervention is never impulsive, it is inevitable. What has been sown, with awareness and intent, will, in time, return to its source. No one needs to push it, no one needs to force it. Order operates on its own, and truth finds its own way into the light. While you were still trying to understand what had happened, heaven had already seen the whole picture. While you were tending to the wounds inflicted by others, heaven had already completed the work of assigning responsibility. And while you were being invited to move forward without carrying resentment, without being bound by someone else's narrative, another process was quietly unfolding, one that did not require your awareness in order to be completed. As it is written, "The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good." Proverbs 1:5-3. This verse was not given to threaten, but to reassure there is no moment in which you are forgotten, no action that goes unseen. Therefore, let your heart be at rest, not because everything is finished, but because everything has been seen. This peace does not come from circumstances changing overnight. It comes from the truth that divine order is operating exactly as it should. You do not need to strain to defend your honor, nor exhaust yourself explaining to those who have already chosen not to understand. Light does not need to justify itself. In this season, what is asked of you is not forceful action, but steady presence to stand in the right place. Keep the right rhythm, and allow heaven to do its work. For once heaven is seen, revelation becomes only a matter of time. When heaven sees, that seeing does not stop at mere acknowledgement. It initiates a deeper process, quieter, more hidden, yet no less precise. There are matters that can only be handled in silence, because if exposed too early, their true nature would be misunderstood. God does not act to satisfy wounded emotions. He acts to restore order, to return what has been distorted to its proper place. And so, while you are still feeling your way toward meaning in what you have lived through, another mechanism is already at work, one that does not require your participation, repeated pleas, or carefully presented evidence. Divine justice does not need to be convinced. It only needs the right moment to reveal itself. Human beings often expect justice to appear as a dramatic moment, a sudden reversal where everything shifts at once. But heavenly order rarely chooses spectacle. It is more like an underground current, persistently flowing beneath the surface, gradually eroding foundations built on misaligned motives. When someone believes they have successfully concealed their intentions, they often fail to see that this very confidence is what exposes them. Small choices, repeated in the same direction, eventually form a picture clearer than any accusation. And in that picture, the one who was harmed does not need to speak. The actions of the one who caused harm become testimony against themselves. During the time of your testing, you may have wondered why God did not intervene sooner, why He allowed things to stretch on until you felt worn down. But that delay did not come from indifference. It came from comprehensive understanding. Some truths require time to mature so that, when they are revealed, no one can question or distort them. If justice arrives too early, it can be dismissed as emotional. When it arrives at the right time, it becomes undeniable. Heaven is not only concerned with stopping wrongdoing, heaven is concerned with everyone understanding why it must be stopped. And to achieve that, it is sometimes necessary to let a chain of choices reveal its own nature. Heaven seeing also includes protecting you from consequences that do not belong to you. When you were drawn into narratives constructed by others, you may have felt compelled to explain, to prove, to clarify every detail. Yet there is profound wisdom in not entering every argument. Each time you refuse to step into that vortex, you allow divine order to work without interference. Light does not need to argue with darkness by simply existing. Darkness begins to retreat, and that retreat does not always happen all at once. Sometimes it shows itself through gradual fractures within the very structures others have built. In this process, you are being invited to look back at yourself, not to assign blame, but to recognize the change taking place within. What you once considered weaknesses, your sensitivity, your capacity to feel deeply, Your tendency to think long-term are being refined into strengths. When you no longer react from a place of self-protection, you learn how to stand firm from within, and that firmness does not depend on others understanding or agreeing. It rests on an increasingly clear alignment between you and the higher order that is guiding you. This is something those who operate only on short-term calculation can never reach. There comes a moment in every divine process of justice when truth begins to press its way into the light. It does not require a dramatic event. Sometimes it appears as a small inconsistency that no longer fits, a careless word that contradicts an earlier action, or a hurried decision born out of anxiety. These fractures may seem insignificant at first, yet they signal that the foundation is no longer sound. And when a foundation has been weakened from within, collapse, however slow, is inevitable. Heaven does not need to strike, it only needs to withdraw its support. What remains, the weight of misaligned choices, completes the work on its own. Meanwhile, your life is being held within a different space, a space of preservation. This does not mean you no longer face challenges. It means those challenges no longer have the authority to define who you are. Each time you choose to keep walking in integrity, despite what has not yet been explained, you send a clear signal to the divine order you trust the process, and that trust is not overlooked. As it is written, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong, for like the grass they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away." Psalm 37:1-2. This word does not call for passive waiting, but for steadiness, a settled inner posture that is not pulled off course by what is only temporary. Therefore, in this season, what matters is not what you see, but where you choose to stand. When you stand in the light, you do not need to control the outcome. The divine order does not require you to track every development. It only asks that you do not abandon your position. Everything else, exposure, correction, the restoration of balance, is unfolding in the most precise way possible, even when you cannot yet see the whole picture. When the process of seeing has been completed, heaven does not rush into action in the way human expectations often demand. Instead, a more subtle phase begins, a phase in which truth is set into motion, not to shock, but to restore balance in a lasting way. At this stage, what matters is no longer what others have done, but how the divine order is rearranging your life from within. God seeing is not only about addressing what is wrong externally, it is about restoring wholeness within you, so that you do not move forward as one who has been wounded, but as one who has been kept. For if justice stops at exposure without leading to healing, then order has not yet been completed. During this time, you may sense a change that is difficult to name, not a surge of joy, nor a clear sorrow, but a deep settling within. Questions that once haunted you begin to lose their weight. The need to understand every detail gives way to a quieter, steadier trust. This is not indifference. It is a sign that you are being moved out of the center of the conflict. When the divine order begins to realign, it often does so by shifting the focus from what happened to who you are being invited to become after all of it. And within that shift, many mental burdens fall away naturally, without force or effort. The seeing of heaven also carries a quiet invitation: release control over the outcome. Human beings often want justice to unfold in a clear, linear sequence. Who is right? Who is wrong? Who is restored? Who is removed? But the order from above does not always follow that logic. It operates multidimensionally, addressing multiple layers of reality at once. When you release the need to witness every step, you allow divine justice to work without being confined by your expectations. This does not make you weaker, on the contrary. It frees you from carrying responsibilities that were never yours to bear. As you are kept in that steadiness, the things that once caused harm begin to lose their power, not because they are denied, but because they are no longer fed by attention or reaction. Truth has its own nature. It does not need to be defended through tension. When light has been present long enough, darkness has nowhere to hide. And when darkness has nowhere to hide, it either withdraws on its own or exposes itself through its own internal contradictions. Neither outcome requires your intervention. Your role in this season is not that of an accuser, but of one who keeps allowing light to be reflected through their life. You may also notice that relationships that once left you confused begin to change on their own, not through confrontation, but through natural distancing. Conversations grow sparse. Connections that were sustained by self-interest or manipulation lose the energy required to continue. This does not happen because you deliberately cut them off, but because the divine order is no longer supplying what those structures need to exist. When seeing has been completed, heaven does not need to push anyone out of your life. It simply restores you to your rightful place. Everything that no longer aligns will fall away on its own. In this process, you are invited to step into a new form of maturity, a maturity that does not come from defeating someone else, but from no longer being defined by the battle itself. This is where the deepest vindication takes place, not when others admit their wrongs, but when you no longer need that admission in order to move forward, when you can look back on what has passed without being pulled down by resentment or regret. You are standing on a foundation upon which divine order can continue to build. This freedom does not come from forgetting, but from placing memory in its proper place as part of the journey, not the center of your identity. As it is written, the Lord will make your righteousness shine like the light, and your justice like the noonday sun. Psalm 3:7-6. This word does not promise a hurried revelation. It promises a revelation that cannot be denied. The light of the noonday sun does not need to increase its intensity. It only needs to be in its rightful position. In the same way, when you are aligned within divine order, the truth about you does not need to be advertised. It becomes clear on its own over time. Therefore, as this part comes to a close, what you are invited into is not the anticipation of a dramatic event, but the continuation of life from the alignment that has already been established. Heaven seeing is not the end point. It is the foundation for what comes next, where justice, healing, and restoration will unfold in ways you have not yet imagined. Move forward with the lightness of one who knows they have been fully seen, not to be judged, but to be wholly preserved within an order that never goes astray. Divine justice does not operate as a reflex, nor does it resemble a human courtroom where evidence is debated and verdicts are shaped by collective emotion. It is a system that existed before any event took place, enduring like law, precise like the breath of the universe. When God sees, He does not merely take note and then forget. He places what He has seen into an operating order, where every cause has its trajectory, and every consequence finds its appointed time to appear. For this reason, justice from heaven does not need noise to prove its authority. It affirms itself through consistency. This is why there are seasons when you feel as though nothing is happening, while in reality everything is being arranged with a precision the human eye cannot keep pace with. Human beings often measure justice by speed. Fast is fair, slow is unjust. But divine order is not measured by speed. It is measured by accuracy. A rushed judgment may satisfy emotion, but it does not repair foundations. God's justice aims to restore order, not merely to identify who is wrong. Therefore, it requires sufficient time for every element to reveal itself, so that truth does not need to be defended by argument. When the moment arrives, the verdict requires no lengthy explanation. It is self-evident, because every piece has settled into its proper place. This mechanism begins with the simplest element, intention. Within divine order, intention carries greater weight than outward action. Two identical actions can lead to entirely different outcomes. depending on the source from which they arise. A deed driven by integrity produces life, even when it causes temporary discomfort. Conversely, an action that appears reasonable on the surface but is born of a distorted motive begins to accumulate an invisible pressure. That pressure does not explode immediately. It builds quietly, until the structure can no longer bear it. This is why some believe they have escaped for a long time, only to collapse in ways no one, including themselves, can control. Within this system, no visible hand is required to intervene and strike down anyone. Divine justice does not operate through violence. It operates through the withdrawal of sustaining grace. When a person repeatedly chooses to move against order, they gradually place themselves outside the zone of preservation. At first, the difference is almost imperceptible. A poor decision here, an unnecessary word there. But over time, those choices form a momentum, and once that momentum is established, a person no longer merely stumbles. They slide in the direction they have chosen. Heaven does not push them forward. Heaven simply ceases to hold them back. For you, the one who has stood within the zone of attack, this mechanism operates in the opposite direction. When you do not respond from the same motive that was aimed at you, you do more than avoid a confrontation. You place yourself within a zone of preservation. Each time you choose to remain upright rather than retaliate, you are doing something very concrete within the divine order. You are refusing to sow another distorted cause. And when no new distorted cause is planted, the trajectory of your life is gradually straightened. This is not passivity. It is action with depth, because it trusts an order greater than momentary emotion. There is a common misunderstanding that divine justice means the wicked must pay in ways human expectation demands. In truth, the core of justice is not punishment, but exposure and realignment. When a distorted system is brought into the light, it loses the capacity to continue as before. Reputation is no longer upheld. Relationships no longer carry sustaining energy. Opportunities no longer open along the old pathways. To outside observers, these shifts may look like misfortune, but within the divine order, they are signs that adjustment is underway. Thunder is not required, only light, sustained long enough. Meanwhile, your own life begins to experience a different kind of stability, one that does not depend on what people think, but on where you stand within the order. When divine justice is at work, it does not merely deal with the other side, it reinforces your foundation. What you build from integrity may take time to show results, but when those results come, they are not easily shaken. This is because they are not constructed on comparison or self-vindication, but on alignment with what already is. As it is written, "For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever." Psalm 3:7-8. This word does not promise a journey without trials. It promises preservation throughout the process. That preservation itself is the clearest evidence that divine justice is not an abstract idea, but a living mechanism, operating even when you cannot see the full unfolding. Therefore, as you move into this section, what matters is not waiting to see what will happen to them, but recognizing what is being established within you. Divine justice does not require you to watch anyone's collapse in order to feel vindicated. It invites you to stand still within the order, to trust a mechanism that never misaligns, and to move forward with the understanding that every cause is returning to its proper consequence, neither sooner nor later, and never by mistake. Once the mechanism of justice has been activated, what follows is not a chain of dramatic events, but a subtle shift in the current of life. Divine justice rarely bends reality through force. It adjusts trajectories through small yet continuous movements, sufficient over time to create an irreversible distance between what aligns and what deviates. At this stage, many mistake its operation for bad luck, or chance. Because they fail to recognize that their repeated choices are being returned to them in the form of outcomes. Heaven does not need to explain itself. The mechanism alone is clear enough for those willing to observe. One of the clearest manifestations of divine justice is the gradual depletion of invisible support. When a person repeatedly acts from a bent motive, they may still advance for a time, sustained by structures built earlier: relationships, reputation, accumulated opportunities. But eventually, those structures begin to lose their capacity to bear weight, not because someone has taken them away, but because they are no longer nourished by alignment with order. Connections grow strained. Opportunities that once came easily begin to demand a higher cost, and confidence rooted in control slowly turns into anxiety. This is the sign that justice is no longer latent. It has entered the phase of practical adjustment. At the same time, for you, the operation of this same mechanism carries a different tone. When you choose not to enter the spiral of negative reaction, you do more than preserve peace. You create a space for the divine order to fill. At first, that space may feel fragile, as if you are relinquishing control. Yet it is precisely within that fragility that a new kind of strength is formed, a strength that does not need to prove itself or defend itself. Many miss this point because they are accustomed to protecting themselves through tension. Divine justice, by contrast, strengthens you from within, so that you are no longer easily pulled off course by what unfolds around you. This mechanism also reveals an important principle. Truth does not need to be pushed into the light. It rises on its own when the surrounding elements no longer align with what is false. Words that were once accepted begin to lose their persuasive power. Stories constructed to conceal hidden motives no longer fit the reality they were meant to obscure. This does not occur because someone deliberately exposes them, but because reality has an inherent tendency to self-correct once accumulated pressure exceeds its threshold. Heaven does not need to intervene directly in every detail. It simply allows truth to carry out the work that has always belonged to it. During this phase, you may notice that the things which once wounded you no longer hold the same power, not because they have been resolved in any outward or visible sense, but because you no longer place yourself in a position where you must react to them. When divine justice is at work, it often releases the wounded from the identity of a victim. You are no longer defined by how you were treated, but by how you choose to stand after everything has passed. This shift is crucial, because without it, even public vindication can become another kind of cage, one that traps you within an old story. There will be moments when it feels as though everything is slowing down, important decisions are delayed, clear forward movement has yet to appear. Yet this slowing is not a sign of stagnation, it is a period of recalibration. Divine justice does not rush you into a new season when the inner foundation is not yet strong enough to sustain what is coming. While others may be swept along by urgency and haste, you are being invited to move slowly, to observe, and to learn to trust the process rather than demand immediate outcomes. This trust does not make you passive, it makes your choices more precise. On the other side, those who have sown distorted motives begin to sense an unease they cannot quite name. They may blame circumstances, other people, or bad luck no longer being on their side. Yet whatever explanation they choose, the feeling of disorientation remains. This is a lesser spoken aspect of divine justice. It does not only adjust circumstances, it reveals inner states. When a person is no longer upheld by order, restlessness becomes the clearest sign, no matter how carefully it is concealed. As it is written, the righteousness of the blameless makes their paths straight, but the wicked are brought down by their own wickedness. Proverbs 1:15. This verse does not describe an act of external violence, but an internal consequence. The stumbling does not come because someone pushes. It comes because the path itself is no longer level. And when the path is no longer level, continuing to walk in the old way becomes increasingly difficult. For you, what is being asked in this season is not to watch that stumbling, but to remain steady in your own position. Divine justice does not require your testimony. Your consistency is already a testimony. When you continue to walk uprightly, even before the full outcome is visible, you are moving in alignment with something greater than yourself, a mechanism that never errs, never forgets, and never needs to be forced in order to complete what it has begun. When divine justice enters its phase of completion, the clearest sign is not the noise of dramatic events, but the consistency of the results. What has been adjusted at deeper levels begins to reflect outwardly without the need for explanation. This is when many realize that heavenly order does not operate through sudden strikes, but through arrangements that cause everything to fall into its proper place. There is no longer room for ambiguity, no space for blame. Each path reveals its own nature. Each choice shows the trajectory it has been quietly forming for a long time. Within this larger picture, justice does not need to announce itself. It is simply recognized. For those who have sown distorted motives, this stage is often accompanied by a nameless sense of powerlessness, not because they lack effort, but because their efforts no longer produce corresponding results. They may intensify control, attempt to repair appearances, or search for new exits, yet the more they try, the more they collide with unseen limits. What once worked now loses effectiveness. Strategies that once offered advantage now expose dependence instead. This is not punishment in an emotional sense. It is the natural consequence of standing outside alignment with order. When sustaining grace withdraws, everything must stand on the truth of its own foundation, and if that foundation is unstable, shaking is inevitable. At the same time, your life begins to reflect a new kind of stability, not a stability born of everything going smoothly, but one rooted in no longer being pulled by every fluctuation. When divine justice is complete, it often leaves a clear mark on those who chose to stand in the light, inner freedom. You no longer need to track developments in order to confirm that you were right. You no longer feel compelled to prove or defend yourself. Peace emerges not because every question has been answered, but because those questions no longer hold authority. This is the deepest form of vindication, one that does not depend on recognition from the outside. There is a subtle principle within the divine order when justice is complete. It does not keep you lingering in the role of a spectator, watching the downfall of others. On the contrary, it invites you to move forward. If you are held back by the need to witness their outcome, justice cannot fully release its healing effect within you. That is why, at times, you may notice your attention being gently redirected toward new opportunities, healthier connections, ideas that begin to take root. This is not the erasure of the past, it is the reorientation of the future. Divine order does not desire that you live in retrospection. It desires that you live in the alignment that is now unfolding. At this stage, the difference between two trajectories becomes clearer than ever. One leads toward contraction, resources diminishing, choices narrowing, anxiety increasing. The other leads toward expansion, not necessarily through dramatic leaps, but through the right connections, with the right people, at the right time. This expansion often unfolds naturally, without force. You do not have to chase after it. What aligns with you finds you. And it is precisely this natural flow that serves as evidence you are moving with the order, rather than trying to bend the order to your own will. Within the completion of justice, there is another aspect that is rarely emphasized, yet deeply significant instruction. Divine justice does not merely resolve a situation, it leaves behind a living lesson for those who observe. When someone witnesses the outcome of misaligned choices, they are reminded that order is not an abstract concept. It is a reality with consequences. And when they witness your steadiness, not bitter, not arrogant, not clinging to victory. They are shown another way, the way of alignment, where strength does not come from diminishing others, but from standing in the right place. As it is written, "The Lord makes firm the steps of the righteous, but the wicked fall by their own snare." Cf. Psalm 37. This verse does not describe a random miracle, it describes a law. A firm path is not one without obstacles, but one built upon a rightly laid foundation. And the snare is not something newly set by another, it is created by misalignment itself. When divine justice is complete, everything is called by its proper name, not through labels, but through outcomes. Therefore, as this section draws to a close, you are invited to recognize that justice is not the final destination, but the foundation for a new phase. It clears distortions so that you may walk more lightly, more clearly, and more freely. What has been addressed does not need to be carried forward. What has been completed does not need to be revisited. Divine order does not turn backward, it moves ahead. And when you walk with it, you do not merely leave what is past, you enter a deeper dimension of life, where every choice is upheld by an unshakable alignment. There is a profound paradox in the journey of those who are kept by heaven. The strongest protection often operates during the seasons that appear most fragile. When external light grows dim, when you can no longer see the road ahead with clarity, this is not a sign that protection has withdrawn. More often, it is the moment when an invisible shield is activated at its fullest. God does not always protect you by removing the darkness. He often protects you by being with you within that very darkness, so that it cannot define or consume you. This presence is not loud or dramatic, but close enough to steady each step when you believe you are walking alone. In seasons of attack that you cannot easily name, you may have felt an unexplainable pressure as though everything around you were testing your ability to remain standing. Unspoken words, unfriendly glances, silences that carry exclusion, all of it converges into a sense of being surrounded. Yet it is precisely in these moments that another protective mechanism is at work: limitation. God allows you to face enough to grow, but never permits what exceeds your capacity to endure. What cannot reach you is not restrained because you are stronger, but because a boundary has been set, a boundary the attacker cannot see, cannot comprehend, and cannot cross. Being kept in the darkness does not resemble absolute safety as human understanding defines it. It does not eliminate all pain, but it prevents pain from becoming destruction. Certain scratches are permitted, but no wound is allowed to touch the core of your identity. When you find yourself still standing after things that should have undone you, it is not coincidence. It is evidence of a protective layer functioning with precision. Heaven is not concerned merely with your survival. Heaven is concerned that you do not lose yourself in the process. Many assume that protection means never being targeted. In reality, the opposite is often true. Those who carry light most clearly are frequently targeted not because they are weak, but because their presence exposes what others wish to keep hidden. In that context, being kept does not mean becoming invisible behind a shield. It means existing within a system of limits that renders attacks unable to achieve their final aim. They may create noise, they may stir temporary unease, but they cannot alter the trajectory God has established for your life. In the darkness, you learn a new form of discernment, one that does not rely on external signs, but on refined inner sensitivity. You begin to distinguish between fear arising from circumstances and warnings that come from a trained intuition. Heaven's preservation does not turn you into a reckless person. It makes you watchful. Decisions made during this season tend to be slow and cautious, yet deeply grounded. You are no longer driven by the pressure to prove anything. You are guided instead by a sense of being in the right place. Difficult to articulate, but unmistakably clear. There are nights when you cannot explain why hope remains. Even though circumstances offer no reasonable justification, there are mornings when you wake with fatigue, yet without despair. These moments are signs of quiet support. God does not always speak to reassure. Often He keeps you from collapsing by maintaining a thin, yet resilient thread between you and life. That thread does not pull you out of the darkness immediately, but it prevents you from falling deeper. And that alone is already a miracle great enough. Preservation in the darkness also includes limiting the reach of toxic words and actions. There are things that could have destroyed reputations, derailed futures, or severed important connections, but they did not happen. Or they happened only partially. You may not immediately notice the things that did not occur, yet they are the very evidence of protection. Divine order often works most powerfully where you cannot see a door that does not open, a meeting that never takes place, a rumor that does not spread as far as intended. These coincidences are not luck, they are boundaries set at precisely the right moment. As you pass through the darkness, your identity is refined in ways that favorable light could never accomplish. You learn to stand without needing constant affirmation. You learn to distinguish between loneliness and necessary separation. You learn to trust that heaven's silence is not distance, but presence without words. These are lessons that cannot be learned in theory. They can only be learned in the dark, where excess is stripped away and what is essential is preserved. As it is written, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 2:3-4. This verse does not deny the existence of the valley. It affirms presence within the valley. Preservation is not the avoidance of darkness, but the refusal to be possessed by it. And when you emerge not by your own strength, but by the support that was quietly there from the beginning, you carry with you a new kind of steadiness, an understanding that requires no explanation. You were being preserved even when you could not feel it. What you have endured was not merely a series of trials, it was evidence of a protective system operating with precision in the dark. From that foundation, the next stages will continue to be built not on the memory of fear, but on the lived experience of a preservation that never withdraws. Heaven's preservation is not expressed only through invisible boundaries placed around you. It is also revealed in the way time itself is adjusted to shield you from harm beyond your capacity to bear. Some things, had they happened earlier, might have crushed you. Had they happened later, they might have hardened you. But divine order knows exactly when a soul is strong enough to face what comes. Thus, in the darkness, you are not only protected from evil, you are protected from overload. This explains why many events seem delayed, why certain truths are revealed only in fragments, not because heaven withholds, but because God guards the rhythm of your heart so that you do not collapse before you understand where you are being led. In this process, there are moments when you feel set apart from the crowd, no longer standing within familiar circles. This separation is not punishment, it is a form of protection. When old environments no longer align with an identity being refined, divine order creates the necessary distance so you are not continually worn down. That distance may initially cause confusion, because humans often associate safety with familiarity. Yet it is within this separation that you begin to hear the subtle movements within yourself more clearly. External noise diminishes, allowing the guiding voice to become easier to recognize. Preservation in the darkness is also expressed through the restoration of your inner language. When attacked, people easily absorb toxic words as truths about themselves. Heaven, in its wisdom, does not always refute those words directly. It does something deeper. It gradually drains them of their weight. Little by little, you realize that negative judgments no longer take root as they once did. They may appear, but they no longer have the right to remain. This is a sign that your identity is being anchored to something more stable, no longer dependent on external approval, but grounded in inner alignment. There are seasons when you feel as though you are standing still, neither moving forward nor slipping back. Yet standing still within the divine order does not mean stagnation. It is a temporary state of stability in which the inner structure is being reinforced. When a foundation is being strengthened, upward construction must pause, not because vision is lacking, but because the safety of the entire structure is at stake. Preservation in the darkness often works this way. Heaven prioritizes durability over speed, depth over breadth. Those who learn to honor this rhythm will emerge with a foundation that no upheaval can easily shake. In the darkness, you are also taught to distinguish between guidance and impulse. Impulse often carries urgency, pressuring you to act in order to soothe anxiety. Guidance, by contrast, carries a calm clarity even when the full path is not yet visible. The preservation of heaven teaches you to pause before decisions that appear attractive but lack depth. Many doors that look like opportunities are, in truth, only temporary escapes from discomfort. When you are kept in the dark, you are protected from stepping through those doors simply out of fear of waiting. Another dimension of preservation is the recalibration of memory. This does not happen by erasing what has occurred, but by placing it within its proper context. Memories that once caused pain no longer surface like sharp blades. They become markers of understanding. You no longer relive the old emotions each time you recall them. This is a subtle process, often slow, yet undeniably real. When memory is healed, it no longer governs the present, and when the present is no longer governed, the future gains space to form with greater freedom. Preservation in the darkness also involves heaven, protecting you from equating your worth with short-term outcomes. There are seasons when every effort seems unnoticed, when every contribution appears to make no visible difference. Yet it is precisely in such seasons that your motives are clarified. When immediate rewards disappear, what remains is the question, why are you doing this? The preservation of heaven allows you to face that question in safety, so that your motives can be refined without being distorted by the pressure of comparison. As it is written, "For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction." Psalm 1:6. This verse speaks not only of an outcome, but of ongoing awareness. To know here is not merely to possess information, it is to watch over, to care for, and to guide. Preservation in the darkness is an expression of that knowing, a gaze that does not turn away, is not interrupted, and is not distracted by outward appearances. Therefore, when you are in the darkness and feel that you have not yet arrived, remember that not having arrived does not mean you are on the wrong path. The preservation of heaven is often most active in stretches of the journey that few people see. It is there that you are being prepared not only to pass through the darkness, but to carry a light strong enough that, when you step out, you are no longer afraid of being swallowed by any future shadow along the way. When preservation in the darkness completes its most hidden work, you begin to notice what seems like a paradox. The very things that once made you feel constrained are becoming the foundation of a new freedom. The pauses, the blocked turns, the unopened doors, when viewed in hindsight, no longer resemble loss, but preservation. In the darkness, heaven does not only keep you from external harm, it also keeps you from premature versions of yourself. Had you been brought into the light too early, you might have walked with an identity not yet firm enough to carry what was coming. Thus, slowing down is not delay, it is precision. At this stage, you begin to sense a shift in how you show up in life. You no longer need to appear strong to hide fragility, nor do you need to shrink yourself to avoid attention. A new balance is forming, a calm that does not come from everything being settled, but from knowing you are being held within order. This calm does not make you passive, it makes you discerning. You no longer react to every stimulus, No longer get pulled into every conversation. This is a sign that preservation has moved from the outside inward, becoming part of how you walk. In the darkness, heaven has taught you to distinguish between true loss and release, disguised as loss. There are things you once clung to at all costs, relationships, roles, images, but when they slipped from your grasp, you did not collapse as you had feared. Instead, you found yourself breathing more freely. This does not mean you did not feel pain. It means you no longer confuse pain with annihilation. Preservation has taught you that some pains are simply signs of transition, not verdicts on your future. One of the most delicate works of preservation in the darkness is the redefinition of strength. You may once have understood strength as endurance, the ability to withstand pressure without breaking. But in the darkness, you learn a deeper layer. Strength also includes the ability to stop, to acknowledge limits, and to refuse to force yourself forward in ways that drain the soul. The preservation of heaven does not invite you to become invulnerable. It invites you to become truthful. And that truthfulness, when held within order, produces a resilience that no form of pretense can ever imitate. You have also begun to realize that the things which once frightened you no longer hold the same power, not because the circumstances have completely changed, but because you have shifted your inner position. When fear is no longer seated at the wheel, your decisions become clearer and more discerning. The preservation that took place in the dark quietly trained you for this by allowing you to experience that fear can be present without being in control. This is a profound spiritual skill, one that can only be learned when there is no obvious light to guide the way, and you are required to trust a subtler form of leading. At this stage, you may sense a gentle prompting to step forward, not through a dramatic leap, but through small, intentional movements. Preservation does not imprison you in darkness longer than necessary. It keeps you there only until you can step out without losing yourself. These first steps often go unnoticed and may even be dismissed as insignificant. Yet within divine order, they carry great weight, because they are taken not from pressure, but from alignment. And what is done in alignment rarely needs to announce itself in order to prove its worth. The preservation in the dark has also left within you a new kind of humility, not self-diminishment, but a clear understanding of the source of the life you carry. You know that you did not overcome by sheer willpower alone. You know that there were moments when, without unseen support, you would not still be standing here. This understanding does not weaken you, it steadies you, because you are no longer living under the illusion of absolute self-sufficiency. You know that you are upheld, and therefore you have nothing to prove to anyone. As it is written, He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Isaiah 40:2-9. This passage does not promise that you will never grow tired. It promises that weariness is not the end. Preservation in the dark is precisely how this promise is fulfilled, not by removing circumstances, but by imparting renewed strength at the right time, in the right way. You now stand at a new threshold, the threshold of one who has been preserved long enough to no longer fear the dark. You do not seek it. You do not cling to it, but it no longer threatens you. This is essential for what comes next, because no one can truly enter expansion while still trembling before the memory of previous dark seasons. The work of heaven's preservation has been completed here. You have been protected, refined, and prepared to move forward, not with recklessness, but with a steadiness born of lived experience that even in the deepest darkness, you were never abandoned. There comes a moment in every process of divine justice when truth can no longer remain latent. It does not erupt like thunder, nor does it appear to overwhelm, but it steps forward quietly with an undeniable weight. The exposure of falsehood is not an act of retaliation. It is the natural consequence of light having been present long enough. In God's order, Deception is not uncovered through loud accusations, but through its inability to sustain itself. When fabricated narratives are no longer nourished by agreement or fear, they begin to fracture from within, and it is then that you realize heaven does not require you to speak in defense of the truth. The truth knows how to emerge at the proper time. This exposure often unfolds in ways that surprise many, because it does not follow the sequence people expect. Truth is not always revealed through confession or unmistakable evidence. Sometimes it appears through growing inconsistencies between words and actions. What was once skillfully concealed begins to collide with reality. Relationships that were built on mutual benefit lose their cohesion. Those who once defended a distorted narrative begin to create distance, not because they fully understand the truth, but because they sense that something is no longer right. Within divine order, that sense alone is enough for the light to continue its work. For you, this stage may bring a feeling that is both relieving and difficult to believe. Relief comes because what you carried in silence begins to lose its weight. Disbelief arises when you realize that you did not have to do anything to make it happen. The exposure did not come because you tried to prove your case, nor because you persuaded anyone. It came because order could no longer accommodate what was false. And this releases you from a significant mental burden. You are no longer responsible for making others understand. Truth, when it comes from its rightful source, does not need to be pushed. There is a vital difference between human exposure and exposure within divine order. Human exposure often carries an intent to control the narrative. Control who is right and who is wrong. Heavenly exposure, by contrast, is not concerned with controlling reactions. It seeks to restore alignment. For this reason, it does not need to humiliate or diminish anyone. Simply placing truth in its proper position allows what is misaligned to reveal itself. This is why, in many cases, no public trial is necessary. The truth is laid out clearly enough for those who need to see it to see, and those who are not ready cannot prevent it from continuing to spread. In this process, you are also being protected from a subtle temptation, the temptation to want to witness the downfall of others as a form of vindication. The exposure of falsehood is not given to satisfy a personal sense of justice. It is given so that you may move forward without remaining trapped in an old story. If you are drawn into tracking every detail of that exposure, you may unknowingly hand power back to what heaven is in the process of dismantling. This is why the divine order often keeps you at just the right distance, close enough for you to be freed, but not so close that you become bound by excessive attention. Exposure also carries a profound educational function. It shows that falsehood does not collapse because someone actively opposes it, but because it cannot endure over time within a system built on truth. This reminds you that you do not need to become the controller of the narrative in order to be protected. When you choose to live in alignment, you place yourself within a current where truth always holds the long-term advantage. What is built on a false foundation may stand for a while, but eventually its very complexity becomes a burden it cannot sustain. As the light gradually spreads, you may notice that words which once caused you to doubt yourself now sound hollow, not because they have disappeared, but because they no longer reach you. Exposure does not occur only outwardly, it happens within you first. When you no longer receive lies as truth, their power has already ended, even before the world around you becomes aware of it. This is a vital aspect of divine justice. It always begins by freeing the wounded from unconscious agreement with what is distorted. As it is written, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Luke 1:2-2. This statement is not a threat, it is a reassurance. It affirms that order does not forget, does not overlook, and does not allow what is false to occupy space indefinitely. Exposure is not a single event, it is a process, and that process does not require your pressure to be completed. Once exposure has begun, What follows is not a dramatic unmasking, but the slow disintegration of structures that once depended on concealment to survive. Falsehood does not collapse because it is directly attacked. It collapses because it no longer has an environment in which it can be maintained. In the divine order, light does not chase darkness, it simply exists. And that presence forces darkness either to adjust or to withdraw. This is the stage when many begin to sense a clear misalignment. What once flowed easily now feels forced. What once was readily believed now requires excessive explanation. And the very need for explanation is the first sign that the foundation is no longer sound. The exposure of falsehood often unfolds through relationships before it appears in words. Those who once stood close begin to create distance. Unspoken agreements no longer feel natural. Not everyone understands what is happening, but many sense that something is no longer right to continue sustaining. In the divine order, this sensing functions as a safety mechanism. It does not require complete knowledge to operate. Only enough inner honesty not to ignore it. Thus, exposure does not need to be loud. It only needs to drain the sustaining energy from connections built on pretense. For you, this stage may bring a very particular experience. You begin to be seen through a different lens, even if not everyone says it aloud. Attitudes shift. Responses subtly change. Opportunities that were once blocked begin to reopen with caution. This is not full restoration yet, but it is a signal that the false narrative is no longer being unconsciously accepted. What matters is that you do not rush to capitalize on these changes in order to reclaim anything. Heavenly exposure does not require you to fight for a position. It allows the fitting place to return to you naturally as order is restored. In this process, another subtle temptation may arise, the temptation to correct the story, to tell your version of the truth so that others will understand properly. But the divine order rarely requires this. When truth is revealing itself in its own way, any intervention driven by control risks interfering with the process. It is not that speaking would be wrong, but that the truth being restored does not need an additional layer of interpretation. There are moments when silence is not weakness. It is alignment with a greater process already in motion. Exposure also brings an important shift in how you see others. As falsehood comes into the light, you may perceive more clearly the fragility behind behaviors that once caused harm. This does not excuse what was wrong, but it helps you avoid equating a person entirely with their actions. This distinction is essential for your inner freedom. If you see others only through the lens of the wounds you endured, you remain confined within the old story. But when you can see without being pulled into emotional reaction, you take another step out of the influence of falsehood. As the light continues to spread, the stories that were once constructed begin to contradict one another. Words are no longer supported by actions. Actions can no longer be convincingly explained. This is the moment when many realize that what they once believed no longer stands as firmly as before. Yet this realization often unfolds in silence, without the need for public declarations. Divine order does not require everyone to change their perspective at once. It only requires enough people to stop sustaining what is false. When that support ends, deception loses its footing on its own. For you, one of the greatest graces of this season is mental relief. You no longer have to live in a state of constant vigilance. No longer have to guess who believes what. As the exposure unfolds, your inner space expands. You are able to refocus on what builds life, your work, healthy relationships, personal growth without being pulled back into old questions. This relief does not come from everything becoming completely clear, but from the fact that you no longer carry the responsibility of making everything clear. As it is written, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. This verse does not describe a dramatic battle, it describes a resilient reality. Light does not need to win by force, it prevails by remaining, and that steadfast presence, sustained long enough, naturally creates a clear separation between what is true and what is false. When exposure reaches its mature stage, the first thing you notice is not the obvious collapse of those who constructed what was false, but a complete shift in the space that deception once occupied. The atmosphere changes. What once felt heavy no longer carries the same pressure. This is a sign that truth has reclaimed the place that belongs to it. Heaven's exposure does not require an official moment of announcement. It is recognized through the quiet sense that something has ended, even if no one says it aloud. And when something has ended within divine order, no effort can pull it back into its former state. At this stage, you may observe that those who once manipulated the narrative begin to stumble over their own words, not because you confront them, but because they no longer have a foundation to sustain their role. Stories once told with confidence now depend on repetition, embellishment, or altered details to survive. Yet with every adjustment, credibility diminishes. In God's order, truth does not need to be edited to fit circumstances. It is consistent from beginning to end. When that consistency remains long enough, everything that lacks it exposes itself. What matters is that you are not drawn into this process of observation with a spirit of judgment. Exposure is not given to turn you into an accuser, but to free you completely from the influence of deception. If you linger too long watching every step of the weakening of false structures, you may unknowingly bind yourself to what heaven is dismantling. For this reason, divine order often leads you alongside the exposure, not places you at its center. You are aware that it is happening, but you are not required to stay there. A clear sign that exposure has reached the depth it needs is when you no longer feel the need to be understood. In the past, being misunderstood may have caused pain, pushing you to correct perceptions or explain motives. But when the light has done its work, that need dissolves, not because everyone now understands correctly, but because their understanding no longer determines your worth or direction. This is a crucial step of liberation. When you stop living in reaction to how others see you, you step out of the final sphere of deception's influence. At this stage, exposure also brings a reordering within your network of relationships. Those who were connected to you through misunderstanding or exploitation gradually drift away, without confrontation. At the same time, new connections, grounded in clarity and mutual respect, begin to emerge naturally. This is not a reward in the way people typically think of rewards. It is a consequence of alignment. When you stand in the light, you attract what shares the same nature. And when you no longer make room for what is false, relationships built on falsehood lose their ground to take root. At a deeper level, the exposure of deception becomes a quiet confirmation of the path you chose. It shows you that choosing not to retaliate, not to argue, not to control the narrative was not weakness, but cooperation with divine order. There are victories that can only be achieved by refusing to fight in the way the world expects. And when you look back, you may recognize that perseverance in alignment accomplished what no defense or justification ever could. The exposure also brings to a close an important spiritual cycle. It marks the transition from a season of being affected to a season of free presence. You no longer carry unanswered questions as a burden. What remains unclear no longer unsettles you. Instead, there is a steady trust within you that what needs to be known will be known. What needs to be set back into place will be set back into place, without you having to monitor or force the process. This trust is not blind. It is built upon lived experience, the experience that the divine order has operated with precision throughout the journey you have just walked. As it is written, "The truth will set you free." John 8:3-2. This verse does not promise that truth will always be comfortable. It promises that truth will not imprison. When the exposure of falsehood is completed in heaven's way, it does not leave you in bitterness or self-satisfaction. It leaves you in freedom. And that freedom is not an escape from circumstances, but an osvobождение from the power those circumstances once held over you. You now stand in a new position, the position of one no longer bound by stories that do not belong to you. The exposure has finished its work, without requiring further explanation. What remains is not to look back, but to move forward. For light does not pause to admire what it has revealed. It continues to illuminate the path ahead. And as you walk in that light, you are not merely leaving falsehood behind, you are stepping into a new space of living, where truth does not need to defend itself, because it has been in its rightful place from the beginning. Collapse within the divine order rarely comes as a sudden catastrophe. More often, it begins when structures once sustained by falsehood lose the ability to support themselves. When light has completed the work of exposure, the next phase requires no further forceful intervention from heaven. What is withdrawn is not opportunity, nor life itself, but the invisible support that once allowed misaligned systems to stand. When that support is gone, collapse becomes a matter of time, not of intent, and because it unfolds from within, no external force can reverse the process. At this stage, you may notice something very clearly. Frantic attempts at patching things up begin to multiply. Those who once felt confident in controlling the situation now have to react constantly. They speak more, explain more, and try to adjust appearances in response to every small shift. Yet that very urgency reveals a deeper truth, that the foundation is no longer stable. In God's order, whatever requires excessive energy to maintain is rarely built on true alignment. Truth does not need tension to be upheld, it stands by its own nature. When a structure exists only through constant control, its collapse began long before any obvious signs appeared. The collapse is irreversible because it is not a punishment imposed, it is the consequence of remaining out of alignment for a sufficiently long time. When a person or a system repeatedly chooses short-term advantage over long-term integrity, they gradually exhaust their capacity to adapt to truth. At first, misalignment may seem advantageous, faster, easier, less questioned, but that advantage always carries an unseen cost, an increasing dependence on concealment. And when concealment becomes a condition for survival, the mere presence of light, sustained over time, will cause everything to fracture. For you, this phase often brings a strange sensation. You are no longer at the center of the conflict, yet everything that once revolved around you begins to shift noticeably. The collapse does not happen because of you, but it happens after you have been removed from the zone of influence. This is a vital principle of divine protection. Heaven does not leave you inside a collapsing space before a misaligned structure loses its capacity to stand. You are already moved internally, relationally, or directionally. This ensures that when the collapse occurs, it does not carry you with it. The collapse is irreversible also because there is no longer anyone left to blame. When every justification has been exhausted, when every maneuvering strategy has been tried, what remains is bare reality. In the divine order, that reality is not colored by emotion, it is simply the outcome of what has been sown. And that outcome does not require agreement to exist. Whether it is acknowledged or not, it continues to operate. This is the point at which many realize there is no familiar escape left, not because heaven has closed its doors, but because the path they chose has led to a place where turning back is no longer possible. Meanwhile, you are being invited not to confuse another person's collapse with your own personal victory. Divine justice does not assign you the role of a spectator who looks on with satisfaction. It grants you the freedom to move forward without being pulled backward by what is falling apart. If you linger too long to watch, you may unintentionally place yourself on the same trajectory as what is being lost. For this reason, divine order often redirects your gaze forward toward what is being built, rather than what is disintegrating. A clear sign of an irreversible collapse is when the solutions that once worked begin to backfire. Actions taken to salvage the situation end up exposing deeper problems. Alliances formed to consolidate power only intensify suspicion. This is not random irony. It is the manifestation of a system that has exceeded its own capacity to sustain itself. When divine order withdraws its support, every effort to preserve the old structure only accelerates its unraveling. As it is written, if a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. Mark 3:2-5. This statement does not apply only to families or communities. It reflects a universal principle. When the gap between what is spoken and what truly exists becomes too wide, no managerial skill or communication strategy can compensate for it. Collapse does not come from the outside. It arises from the ever-widening distance between form and substance. What you are being invited into is not the observation of disintegration with curiosity or gratification, but the recognition of the protection that was already in place. You were removed from that space not because you were more right, but because you chose alignment earlier. An irreversible collapse is not the end of the story. It is the necessary closure that allows a new order to be established. And that new order is not built on comparison, but on a cleared foundation, one on which you can walk more lightly, no longer carrying the weight of structures that were never meant to endure. When collapse has passed, the point of reversal, a very characteristic pattern begins to appear: internal disorientation. This is not chaos caused by external events, but a loss of inner direction among those who once believed they were in control. They no longer act from initiative, but from reflex. Each decision is made not to build, but to prevent what is slipping away. In divine order, this is a clear sign that a system has lost its compass. When a person or a collective is no longer oriented by truth, they are forced to orient themselves by fear. And fear, though it may seem powerful in the short term, is always a fragile foundation for any structure. At this stage, collapse no longer needs an additional trigger. It sustains itself. Every action meant to save the situation creates more pressure. Every word meant to reassure only increases doubt. What was once considered skillful now becomes convoluted. What was once seen as flexible now turns contradictory. This is not personal punishment. It is the logical consequence of operating in misalignment over time. When truth is no longer used as the point of reference, every adjustment becomes provisional, and that provisional nature is eventually exposed by reality itself. Meanwhile, you stand in a very different position, not a morally superior one, but a safer one in terms of order. You no longer have to guess what will happen next, because you are no longer bound to the outcome of a system that is collapsing. This is a subtle yet profound liberation. When you no longer tie your destiny to the survival of what has gone off course, you are no longer drawn into its rhythm of disorder. The collapse may continue, but it takes place outside your inner space. One of the most striking features of this phase is the reversal of roles. Those who once confidently judged, controlled, or manipulated now seek validation. Those who once used your silence to interpret things to their advantage must now face their own silence. Yet divine order does not invite you to witness this reversal to satisfy a personal sense of justice. Rather, it invites you to recognize a deeper lesson. Power built on misalignment is always temporary, while stability built on alignment needs no display. The irreversibility of collapse is also revealed through the gradual closing of familiar escape routes. Paths that once allowed responsibility to be avoided no longer work. Strategies that once diluted the truth are no longer accepted. This does not happen all at once or in a dramatic fashion. It unfolds incrementally, just enough for those involved to sense that their options are narrowing. Within the divine order, This narrowing is not meant to coerce, but to compel the truth to be faced. When there is no longer sufficient space to conceal, people are forced to look directly at what they themselves have built. For you, what matters in this phase is not stepping backward to add explanations or to help clarify what is already revealing itself. There is deep wisdom in allowing order to complete its work without interference. If you return to participate in efforts to salvage what is collapsing, even with good intentions, you may inadvertently slow your own process of release. Divine order did not bring you out of the collapse so that you might return as an observer or advisor. It brought you out so that you could continue moving toward the life that is opening before you. On a deeper level, this collapse also uncovers an important truth about you. You never needed to defeat anyone in order to be safe. You only needed to stop walking alongside what was misaligned. This frees you from a familiar worldly pattern, the belief that success comes from another's failure. Within the divine order, your safety does not arise from someone else falling, but from your having stood in the right place when order was being restored, and it is precisely this that allows you to move forward without carrying the burden of comparison or rivalry. The irreversibility of collapse also serves as a quiet reminder that anything not built on truth has an expiration date. It may last longer than you expected, it may cause more harm than necessary, but it cannot endure forever. When light is present, when support has been withdrawn, what is false has no future to cling to. This does not make you feel triumphant. It makes you more discerning about what you choose to build from this point forward. You are invited to recognize that the collapse unfolding does not require your witnessing or validation in order to be real. It is already on its own trajectory. What you are called to do is to keep walking with the lightness of one no longer bound to structures that have lost their foundation. Divine order does not pull you out of the ruins so that you can stand and stare at them. It pulls you out so that you no longer have to live among them. And it is within this separation that you begin to realize that what is ending behind you is merely old ground giving way so that ahead of you, another ground, firmer and more truthful, can be stepped onto without fear of collapse. As the collapse reaches its final stage, what stands out most is not the extent of the damage, but the silence that settles in after the last attempts to hold things together. This is the moment when every strategy has been exhausted, every justification has grown weary, and there is nothing new left to try. In the divine order, this silence does not signify peace, it signifies an ending. Not an ending brought about by being overpowered by a stronger force, but an ending born of having no energy left to continue existing. What no longer carries life cannot be prolonged, no matter how skillfully it is concealed. And when life has withdrawn, every act of maintenance becomes an empty gesture. At this stage, those at the center of the collapse often begin to confront a difficult truth. The issue is not the circumstances, but the foundation. There is no one left to blame, no external situation capable of fully explaining what is happening. Instability is no longer a series of incidents, it becomes a constant state. This is the point at which many people face themselves for the first time, not through the lens of achievement or image, but through the bare reality of choices repeated over a long period of time. Within the divine order, such confrontation is unavoidable once the process has reached its conclusion. For you, the collapse at this stage no longer carries the emotional charge it once did. You are no longer shocked, no longer angry, no longer expectant. This is not because you have become indifferent, but because you were removed from the field of influence earlier on. The inner detachment you now experience is a clear sign that order has completed its work of protecting you. When you can witness a disintegration without being drawn in, without being triggered by old memories, it is evidence that you are no longer standing on the same ground as what is collapsing. And when the ground is different, the trajectory is different as well. One defining characteristic of an irreversible collapse is that it does not create a long-term void. What disintegrates leaves behind a space, and that space does not remain neutral. Within the divine order, space always seeks to be filled either by life or by chaos. When what is false collapses and truth is not ready to replace it, chaos rushes in. This is why many experience the post-collapse phase as a sequence of continued losses, not because they are being struck again, but because there is no new foundation on which to stand. The old has vanished, but the new has not yet been built. You, however, do not step into that void while collapse unfolds behind you. Divine order has already prepared another ground for you. That ground may not yet be fully visible, but it is firm enough for you to stand on without fear of slipping. This is the crucial difference between one who is preserved and one who is swept along by the process of disintegration, not because you are more intelligent or more virtuous, but because you chose to step away from misalignment before it reached the point of no return. And that choice, though it may have felt deeply lonely at the time, placed you on an entirely different trajectory. The irreversible collapse also carries a very clear closing function. It shuts the doors that, if left open, might still tempt you to return. When all former paths are no longer viable, when no invitation remains strong enough to pull you back, you are released from hesitation. Many people remain stuck not because they do not know what is right, but because what is wrong still appears to be working. When that appearance disappears, the choice becomes clearer, and within that clarity, you no longer have to struggle with yourself in order to move forward. At a deeper level, this collapse also completes an important lesson about power. You see clearly that power does not lie in controlling the narrative, manipulating perception, or maintaining an image. These forms of power may create temporary influence, but they cannot withstand sustained exposure to light. True power, power that can endure, is always connected to alignment. When something is aligned with order, it does not need to defend itself. When something is misaligned, it must constantly protect itself. And the need for constant self-defense is itself a sign of fragility. As it is written, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 2:6-7. This saying does not describe an act of revenge designed from the outside. It describes an internal consequence. Collapse does not happen because someone pushes it, happens because the structure was built in a way that cannot stand. When the gravity of truth begins to exert its force, everything misaligned naturally moves toward its own conclusion. As this section comes to a close, what you are invited to do is not to look back in order to confirm that the collapse is complete, but to walk forward with the certainty that you no longer belong to that space. What is dissolving behind you does not require your attention to finish its work. Divine order does not ask you to be a witness to the ending. It invites you to become a participant in a new beginning. And that beginning is not built on the old ground that has fallen, but on a different foundation, one where life does not need to hide, where truth does not need to be defended, and where each step is no longer an act of survival, but the natural continuation of what was rightly set in place from the start. When the collapse of distorted structures has completed its task, divine order does not leave you standing in the void between what has fallen apart and what has not yet been built. Another process begins, not loud, not performative, but deeper and more restorative than any form of vindication, healing. This is not about forgetting what happened, nor is it a call to deny pain. Healing within the order of God is the act of placing pain in its proper position, no longer at the center that governs your life, but as a memory that has been processed, no longer holding power over the present. Those who have been attacked often carry wounds that are not easy to name. Not all of them are obvious blows. Many come from distortion, from being doubted, marginalized, or placed into narratives that do not reflect the truth of who you are. These injuries do not always cause sharp pain. More often, They create a low-grade tension, a prolonged state of vigilance that makes it difficult to fully relax. The healing initiated by heaven does not aim to make you tougher so that you can endure better. It aims to dismantle that defensive state, so that you no longer live as though the attack is still ongoing. In this season, you may notice that reactions which once felt natural, over-explaining, excessive guarding, or withdrawing to avoid being misunderstood, begin to lose their momentum. Not because you are trying to change your behavior, but because the inner foundation has shifted. When divine order heals, it often begins by recalibrating your internal sense of safety. You no longer need to repeatedly tell yourself, "I'm okay." You begin to feel okay, even when no external proof has just appeared. This is a very important sign of genuine healing. It does not require immediate validation from circumstances in order to exist. This healing also includes releasing you from carrying responsibility for what was never yours. Those who have been attacked often find themselves asking, "What did I do wrong?" or "If I had been different, could this have been avoided?" These questions may sound humble, but when prolonged, they become a burden. Divine order does not deny the value of self-examination. It simply refuses to let you condemn yourself for the choices of others. In the healing process, such questions gradually give way to clearer discernment, what truly belongs to your responsibility, and what you no longer need to carry. There are wounds that can only be recognized once you are no longer fighting. During the attack, you may have been operating in survival mode, focused on staying upright, keeping your rhythm, not collapsing. But once the danger is past, the body and mind begin to allow themselves to fully feel what was previously compressed. This is why the healing phase is sometimes accompanied by fatigue or heightened sensitivity. Not because you are becoming weaker, but because you no longer need to brace yourself. Healing does not make you fragile. It gives you permission to relax without fear of being wounded again. In this process, heaven is also doing something very subtle, restoring your trust in yourself. Not a form of self-importance, but the trust that your intuition is not broken, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, and that your ability to sense misalignment from the very beginning was not imagination. Those who have been under prolonged attack often begin to doubt their own capacity for discernment, because constant distortion blurs the boundary between what is real and what is false. Healing restores that boundary, so that you can trust your own perceptions without continually seeking validation from the outside. God's healing does not happen in a one-and-done way. It is more like layers of tension being gently released, knots gradually loosened. There are days when you feel a clear sense of lightness. There are days when it seems as though you have slipped back into an old state. But within the divine order, these fluctuations are not signs of failure. They are part of the rebalancing process. What matters is not how you feel on any given day, but the overall direction you are living with: less defensiveness, less suspicion, and greater presence with yourself. As healing begins to reach deeper layers, you will realize that what is being restored is not only emotion, but your entire inner rhythm, the rhythm that was once disrupted by long periods of having to protect yourself. There is a very specific kind of fatigue in those who have been under prolonged attack, the exhaustion of constantly reading the room, of weighing every word, every reaction, every step. This fatigue does not always show up as physical burnout. More often it manifests as a quiet rigidity that makes it difficult to feel natural, even in moments of safety. Heaven's healing begins to dismantle this very rigidity, so that you no longer live in a state of readiness for battle when the battlefield has already receded. In this season, you may notice that you are learning again how to be present without armor. This is not easy, because defensiveness once helped you survive. Yet what helps you survive in one season does not necessarily need to accompany you into the next. Healing does not condemn old self-protective mechanisms. It simply lays them down gently, one by one. when they are no longer necessary. You are not forced to trust people immediately, nor are you pushed to open yourself beyond what is safe. Divine order honors your pace, because it knows that true trust cannot be commanded into existence. An important sign of healing at this level is your growing ability to distinguish between healthy vigilance and trauma-driven suspicion. Healthy vigilance keeps you safe without closing you off. Trauma-based suspicion keeps you shut down even when danger is no longer present. As healing unfolds, you do not become more naive, you become clearer. You know when to listen to intuitive warnings, and when fear is merely an echo of the past. This discernment does not arrive overnight. It is shaped through small experiences, where you step out just a little and discover that you are not harmed in the way you once feared. Healing also touches the way you look back on past relationships, not to reanalyze every detail, but to release the emotional threads that still linger. Those who have been attacked often carry an unconscious, painful loyalty to the past, a loyalty to the need to understand, to explain, to close things with a complete answer. But divine order does not require every story to be concluded in an ideal way. In healing, you learn that some relationships do not need to be resolved. They simply need to be laid down. And when they are laid down rightly, they no longer pull you back with unanswered questions. At an even deeper level, healing begins to restore your capacity to feel joy, not grand joy, but the simple joy that may have been suspended for a long time. Those who live under pressure often lose the ability to enjoy small things, because the mind is always in a state of alert. As healing takes place, you may suddenly notice yourself laughing without forcing it, resting without guilt, or feeling light without a particular reason. These moments are signs that your nervous system is relearning this truth. The present moment is safe, and when the present is safe, life can begin to flow again in a natural way. Heaven's healing also does something very important. Though rarely spoken of, it gives you back the right to change. Those who have been attacked are often trapped in images, others assigned to them, either the victim or the one who is strong and enduring. Both frames are limiting. In healing, you are allowed to step out of every label. You do not need to prove that you are fine by forcing positivity, nor do you need to rehearse your pain to be understood. You are allowed to be a person who continues, who moves, who grows without explanation. There may come moments when you realize that you no longer react as you once did to familiar triggers. What once caused you to contract inward now simply invites you to pause and observe. What once ignited anger now passes through you as a brief wave of sadness and then moves on. This is not numbness, it is a sign that the wound is no longer open. When a wound is closed, it no longer responds to every minor touch. Healing does not erase memory, but it changes how memory interacts with the present. In this process, you also learn a deeply liberating truth. You do not need to return to an old version of yourself in order to be considered healed. The you of the present, who has passed through darkness, who has been protected, who has been healed, is a different version altogether, carrying a depth and subtlety you did not possess before. Healing is not a reversal of time, it is the integration of experience into a broader identity. When you accept this, you stop measuring yourself against the past and begin to be fully present in the now. As healing moves toward convergence, you begin to notice a foundational shift. You are no longer operating from the memory of the attack, but from the life that is being restored within you. This is not a dramatic or emotionally charged moment. It is like the body suddenly remembering its natural rhythm of breathing after a long period of shallow breaths caused by tension. You no longer have to remind yourself that you are safe. Safety becomes the default state. And that very state is the sign that healing has moved beyond the surface and has taken root in the way you exist in the world. At this stage, memories that once carried great weight begin to change their temperature. They are still there, but they no longer burn. You can remember without being pulled back into old emotional spirals. This is crucial, because a memory is only truly healed when it no longer dictates your present reactions. The divine order does not erase memory so that you forget the lesson. It removes memory's power to control. When memory is placed in its proper position, it becomes a source of wisdom rather than a source of fear. Healing at this depth also transforms the way you see yourself in the mirror of experience. Before, you may have seen yourself as the one who was wounded, the one who was betrayed, the one who was targeted. Those labels, while truthful for a season, were never meant to become a permanent identity. In healing, you begin to see yourself as one who has passed through, not one who is stuck. This shift is subtle, yet profoundly liberating. When you no longer define yourself by the wound, you stop unconsciously organizing your life around the avoidance of pain. Instead, you begin to organize your life around life itself. One clear sign that healing has reached completion is the ability to choose without being driven by the past. You no longer choose out of fear of repeating what was, nor do you choose in order to prove that you have moved on. You choose because it aligns with who you are now, someone refined by trial, yet not bound by it. Such decisions carry a distinct calm, no need for lengthy explanations, no need for widespread approval. They are simply true to the new rhythm of life that the divine order has established within you. At this point, you may also notice that your compassion has changed its form. Before, compassion may have come with self-abandonment, excessive endurance, or the impulse to understand on behalf of others. After healing, compassion becomes clearer and more discerning. You can empathize without placing yourself in harm's way. You can understand without needing to remain. This is not coldness, it is love placed within order. And love that is ordered is always more enduring than love born of guilt or obligation. The completion of healing also brings a profound reconciliation, not with those who caused harm, but with your own journey. You stop arguing with the past. Stop wishing that everything had been different, not because you believe what happened was good, but because you can see that you were carried through it without being destroyed. This reconciliation releases a vast amount of energy that was once trapped in the question, if only. When that energy is returned to you, you gain space to create, to build, and to live more fully in the present. Within this healing, you also learn forgiveness in its deepest sense, not as a declaration that what was wrong no longer matters, but as a decision not to allow what was wrong to continue occupying space in your inner life. This kind of forgiveness does not require change or an apology from the other side. It is an act of sovereignty, upheld by the divine order. When you forgive in this way, you do not release others from consequence. You release yourself from carrying a burden that is no longer necessary. When healing has completed its hidden, inward work, the divine order does not stop at returning you to a state of mere stability. God does not only restore what was damaged, He restructures you so that you can carry something greater without breaking. This is the fundamental difference between human recovery and restoration from heaven. Recovery brings you back to the starting line. Overflowing restoration lifts you onto higher ground, where what once caused you to falter now becomes a launching platform. And this does not happen through an instant miracle. It unfolds as a new order is first established within you, before it ever manifests outwardly. Restoration beyond measure begins by returning to you the ability to see the future without shrinking back. In the past, the future may have been entangled with worries such as, will this happen again? Or, am I truly safe enough to trust? After healing, those questions no longer occupy the center, not because you have every guarantee, but because you now carry an inner foundation strong enough that the possibility of risk no longer paralyzes you. Heaven's restoration does not eliminate all uncertainty. It equips you to stand steady within uncertainty. And it is precisely this capacity that opens doors you could not step through before, not because they were closed, but because you were not yet ready. At this stage, you may notice that what was once taken from you does not return in the same form. New relationships do not resemble the old ones. New opportunities do not operate by familiar logic. This is not a lack, it is a sign of an upgrade. Divine order does not patch the old structure, it rebuilds according to a different standard. You are no longer placed in spaces where you must defend yourself just to survive. Instead, you are led into environments where your presence fits, where light does not provoke anxiety, and where value does not need to be proven through excessive sacrifice. Restoration beyond measure also includes God expanding your sphere of influence, not so that you stand out, but so that what you carry can reach more people. Having passed through attack, exposure, collapse, and healing, you now bear a kind of understanding that cannot be learned from books. This understanding does not require long explanations. It is felt through the way you are present, more grounded, clearer, and no longer triggered by what once unsettled you. Divine order uses this very steadiness to create impact, not through loud words, but through living consistency. At a deeper level, restoration beyond measure returns to you the right to dream without self-censorship. Those who have been attacked often unconsciously shrink their dreams to avoid attention or disappointment. But as restoration unfolds, you realize that desiring good things is no longer a risky act. Not because everything will happen as hoped, but because your sense of worth is no longer tied to outcomes. This restoration frees your imagination from the fear of failure, a fear once nourished by experiences of sabotage. When that fear is dismantled, dreams are given room to grow in a healthy way. Restoration beyond measure is also expressed as divine order places you into new rhythms of work, rest, and connection that are more aligned with who you are now. You no longer need to do too much to be recognized, nor sacrifice excessively to maintain your place. This may surprise those who were accustomed to you always being the one who carried the load. But restoration does not consult old habits. It responds to the needs of true life. And true life always moves towards sustainable rhythms, not depleting ones. In this process, you also learn how to receive without guilt. Those who have lived in lack or had things taken from them often struggle to accept goodness without the lingering question, do I deserve this? Restoration beyond measure heals that feeling as well. You begin to understand that grace is not a reward for endurance, but a natural flow when order is restored to its rightful place. You do not need to pay with pain in order to receive blessing. You simply need to be in the right position for blessing to find you. As it is written, I have come that they may have life, and have it abundantly. John 1:0-1:0. This does not speak of abundance as mere accumulation of material things. It speaks of the fullness of life, a state in which you no longer live in defense, no longer shrink back for fear of loss, but live with an open heart, knowing you are being upheld. Restoration beyond measure is the way this promise becomes tangible in your life. Step by step, rhythm by rhythm, unhurried yet certain. As restoration beyond measure continues to expand, you begin to see that what is changing is not only external circumstances, but the way you engage with life itself. A subtle yet decisive shift takes place. You no longer approach every opportunity with the question, will I be hurt again, but with a calm discernment of whether it is fitting or not. The difference is profound. Fear always forces quick reactions, early defenses, and withdrawal before true sensing can occur. Restoration, by contrast, gives you time to listen, to observe, to choose without being driven by old memories. When you have time, you have agency, and when you have the freedom to choose in peace, you are no longer easily pulled back into the cycles that once drained you. Over-recovery also transforms the way you enter new relationships. You no longer search for absolute reassurance, nor do you place yourself in a position where you must prove your worth in order to be allowed to stay. Instead, you carry with you a sense of inner fullness, a fullness that does not come from having everything, but from no longer being disconnected from yourself. This creates a natural filtering. Relationships that require self-erasure to survive gradually lose their appeal, not because you have become cold, but because you have learned what connection without depletion feels like. Recovery does not close your heart, it establishes boundaries so that your heart can remain present for the long term. At this stage, you also begin to notice that abilities once suppressed are returning: your capacity for creativity, for focus, for seeing solutions rather than only risks. Those who have lived under prolonged attack often remain in crisis processing mode, where intellectual energy is consumed by constant defense. When the threat is no longer there, that energy is released, and when it returns, it does not come back in its old form, but in a sharper one. You do not merely do more, you do things differently, more precisely, more selectively, and with far less distraction from what is no longer worthy of your attention. Over-recovery also reveals itself in how you redefine success. Success is no longer something you achieve to compensate for earlier losses. It becomes an alignment between what you do and who you are becoming. Achievements reached from this place carry a sense of rightness, no need for display, no need for comparison. You can accomplish more without feeling that you are trading away your peace. This is one of the clearest signs that recovery has moved beyond compensation and entered the phase of restructuring. In this process, you also learn how to receive recognition without becoming dependent on it. Those who were once dismissed or slandered often swing between two extremes, craving validation at any cost, or rejecting all acknowledgement to avoid being wounded again. Over-recovery heals both extremes. You can receive praise without feeling obligated to live up to someone else's expectations. You can be seen without losing your inner freedom. This releases you from a heavy burden, the burden of maintaining an image in order to secure a position. Recovery also brings a profound shift in how you face new challenges. In the past, any obstacle could trigger memories of earlier attacks, causing you to overreact or withdraw too soon. Now, you approach challenges as a natural part of growth. Not every difficulty is a sign of danger. Many are simply signs that you are entering new territory. Over-recovery helps you discern what calls for caution and what is an invitation to expand. When this discernment becomes clear, you no longer confuse challenge with threat. At a deeper level, over-recovery restores your sense of walking with life itself. You no longer feel that you must fight life to preserve what is good. Instead, you begin to sense that you are moving within a current, not an easy or careless one, but an ordered flow. What aligns with you comes without force. What does not align departs without confrontation. This companionship with life gives rise to a form of confidence very different from achievement-based confidence. It is the confidence of one who knows they are moving at the right rhythm. As over-recovery reaches a stable phase, you begin to recognize something essential. You no longer need to wait for a dramatic sign to permit yourself to live fully. In the past, you may have believed you needed a clear confirmation, a specific achievement, or a spectacular reversal to trust that things had truly changed. But in the divine order, deep recovery rarely arrives with trumpets. It comes through the consistency of ordinary days, days when you wake without a sense of vigilance, days when you make decisions without consulting old fears. When everyday life feels lighter, that itself is the evidence that recovery has crossed beyond compensation and entered a sustainable state. At this stage, you also begin to experience a subtle freedom in choosing your own pace. You are no longer driven by the feeling that you must do more to make up for lost time. Over-recovery does not place you in a race with the past. It removes you from that race altogether. You can slow down without anxiety, decline without guilt, choose less without fear of falling behind. This does not make you less effective. On the contrary, it gives real weight to what you do choose. When you are no longer expending energy to prove yourself, that energy becomes available for what holds lasting value. Over-restoration also reveals itself clearly in the way you now face memories that were once sources of pain. They no longer surface as bitter reminders, but as markers along a journey. You can look back without feeling pulled backward. You can tell your story without reliving the pain. This is an important sign that those memories have been integrated into your identity, rather than remaining outside of it like an unhealed fracture. When memory is integrated, it no longer demands constant attention. It becomes a foundation for wisdom, not a trigger for reaction. Within this restoration, you also learn to use your new freedom responsibly. Freedom is no longer understood as doing whatever you want, but as the capacity to choose what is appropriate without being driven by invisible pressures. You realize that not every open door needs to be walked through. Over-restoration gives you the calm to choose a calm that does not come from a lack of desire, but from clarity of purpose. When you know where you are going, you no longer need to test every path just to prove that you can walk it. Another deep shift is the way you perceive abundance. In the past, abundance may have been tied to a fear of lack, accumulating so as not to lose again. After restoration, abundance is experienced as flow. You know when to receive, when to give, and when to hold back in order to preserve your rhythm of life. This does not make you closed off. It makes you freer in how you allocate energy, time, and attention. Over-restoration does not teach you to cling. It teaches you to circulate without becoming depleted. At a deeper level, over-restoration returns to you the joy of creating without fear of being misunderstood. Those who have had their image distorted often unconsciously self-edit, dimming their light, softening their voice, reducing their uniqueness to avoid conflict. As restoration takes place, you stop doing this, not because you want confrontation, but because you no longer need to shrink to feel safe. Your safety no longer depends on being less visible. It is anchored in an order that has been set back in its rightful place. And when that order is secure, creativity can flow freely without needing permission from fear. Over-restoration also reshapes how you view the success of others. Where once another person's success might have unconsciously activated memories of being taken from or blocked, now you can rejoice without comparison and learn without self-diminishment. This is a clear sign of healing brought to completion. You no longer measure your worth against someone else's position. When you are no longer trapped in comparison, you gain space to collaborate, to share, and to expand your influence in healthier ways. When over-restoration has stabilized and a new rhythm of life has been established, divine order does not lead you into advancement through impulse or self-assertion. Advancement in God's plan is not a reward for having endured long enough. It is the natural outcome of standing in the right place with sufficient stability. Therefore, the first thing you sense at this stage is not acceleration, but repositioning. You are not suddenly pushed upward. You are placed into spaces where your capacity, experience, and inner depth are aligned with the responsibility opening before you. This kind of advancement does not overwhelm you, because it does not exceed what has been prepared through the journey that came before. One clear sign of advancement being rightly placed is that you no longer need to compete for opportunity. The doors that open do not require you to push or squeeze through, nor do they demand that you trade your peace in order to enter. In the past, you may have seen opportunities come and go amid tension, either because they were blocked or because you were not yet ready to sustain them. Now, with order restored, what comes to you carries a sense of fit, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer have to contort yourself to belong in the new space. This sense of fit is evidence that advancement comes not from personal ambition, but from intentional arrangement. Rightly placed advancement also transforms how you understand power and influence. Before, power may have been associated with control or broad recognition. After the journey you have walked, you understand that enduring power does not require many words, it requires clear presence. You begin to influence others not by imposing your views, but by how you hold rhythm, maintain boundaries, and keep truth steady within complex situations. This influence is not loud, yet it is difficult to ignore. It flows from consistency, a quality formed only when you have passed through testing without losing your identity. At this stage, the divine order is also very careful in expanding your sphere. Not every invitation is an advancement, and not every expansion is sustainable. Advancement that is rightly placed is often accompanied by clearer selection. You may now say no to offers that once excited you, because you recognize that they do not align with the direction that has already been established. This does not cause you to miss out, it protects you from being scattered. When you choose more discerningly, what you choose carries greater weight, and it is precisely that weight that produces genuine growth. This advancement is also expressed in the way you are trusted in a new manner. It is not trust based on promises or appearances, but on the living record of how you have handled difficulty. Those in authority begin to entrust you with responsibilities that require maturity, not just skill. You are invited into decisions that call for discernment, not merely productivity. This is a sign that the divine order is placing you in positions where your inner depth is a decisive factor. This advancement does not separate you from who you truly are. It requires you to bring that very self into a wider space. In this process, you also learn how to receive responsibility without imposing burden upon yourself. In the past, you may have equated responsibility with pressure, a pressure rooted in the need to perform perfectly in order to avoid being attacked. Now, responsibility is felt as a stewardship, not a test. You know that you do not need to defend your position by overfunctioning. The order that placed you there did not do so to exhaust you, but to allow you to contribute in a way that fits who you are now. This shift releases you from the fear of making mistakes, allowing you to learn and adjust without panic. Rightly placed advancement also brings a new clarity about pace. You are no longer driven by the speed of others in order to prove that you are worthy. You work according to the rhythm of sustainability, a rhythm forged through seasons of waiting and endurance. This enables you to go farther without being depleted. In the divine order, advancement is not measured by how high one rises in a short time, but by the ability to stand firm over the long term in the place that has been entrusted. As it is written, whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. Luke 1:6-10. This word does not encourage the accumulation of merit, it emphasizes consistency. Rightly placed advancement does not come because you have done impressive things before others, but because you have maintained alignment in small matters, even when no one was watching. And it is this alignment that becomes the foundation upon which the divine order can expand your space without fear that you will be swept away. As this part opens, you are not entering a new climb, you are entering a new position. That position does not require you to become someone else, nor does it force you to repeat old survival strategies. It invites you to bring everything that has been refined, calmness, discernment, integrity, into a broader sphere of life. And within this rightly placed advancement, you begin to realize that what enables you to stand is not the height you reach, but the foundation that was set in place long before any door ever opened. When advancement has been rightly placed, you begin to notice that the most visible change is not in titles, roles, or outward influence, but in how you remain steady within these new spaces. In the past, each step forward may have carried an undercurrent of tension. the fear of having to hold your position, prove your competence, and constantly perform to avoid being diminished. Now, you enter new levels of responsibility with a fundamentally different sense of grounding, not because you believe you will encounter no difficulty, but because you no longer confuse difficulty with danger. This distinction is a direct result of the journey you have walked, and it allows you to be fully present without shrinking under invisible pressure. Rightly placed advancement is also revealed in the fact that you are no longer governed by the gaze of those who never walked with you through the dark seasons. In the past, external recognition or rejection may have strongly influenced how you evaluated yourself. But after restoration and realignment, you no longer construct your identity around the reactions of the crowd. This does not make you distant or self-satisfied. It makes you freer to make hard decisions that may not please everyone, but that align with the direction you have been given. When you no longer have to satisfy every gaze, you are able to serve with clarity and integrity. At this stage, you also begin to realize that true advancement is never merely about moving upward. It always comes with being entrusted. Divine order does not lift you so that you stand alone at a higher position, but so that you may become a point of support for others who are entering similar seasons. This does not mean that you must carry other people's problems. It means that your presence, calm, grounded, unreactive, creates a safe space where others can steady their own rhythm. Advancement that is rightly placed always carries a dimension of service, even when its outward form looks like personal achievement. This advancement also transforms the way you handle conflict. In the past, conflict may have triggered memories of earlier attacks, causing you either to become overly defensive or to withdraw in order to avoid being hurt. Now, you are able to face disagreement without automatically feeling threatened. You listen without losing your stance. You speak clearly without needing to raise your voice. This is not a skill learned from books. It is the fruit of an inner life that has been healed and restored. When the inner world is no longer in turmoil, conflict ceases to be a battlefield. It becomes a place of discernment. Another very clear sign of advancement that is rightly placed is the way you steward your energy. Before, you may have poured yourself out completely to seize opportunities, afraid that if you slowed down, everything would slip through your fingers. Now, you understand that not every invitation requires an immediate response. You allow yourself time to weigh, to pray, and to listen before committing. This slowing down does not cause you to miss opportunities. It protects you from stepping into spaces that are not aligned, no matter how appealing they may appear. Advancement that is rightly placed is always accompanied by the ability to choose the right pace, not by running faster than everyone else. In these new spaces, you also begin to see that qualities once overlooked or misunderstood are now revealed as strengths. Your sensitivity allows you to read the atmosphere before issues erupt. Your carefulness helps you avoid hasty decisions. Your integrity builds lasting trust, even when it brings no immediate advantage. Divine order does not strip these traits away to make you fit a system. He places you where these very qualities are essential. This is advancement that does not require you to change your nature, but calls you to carry your refined nature into a wider sphere. Advancement that is rightly placed also sharpens your awareness of necessary boundaries. Not everyone has the same access to you as before, and not every conversation requires your deep involvement. This does not come from withdrawal, but from honoring a new rhythm of life. As responsibility increases, protecting your inner space becomes more vital than ever. You learn that saying no at the right time does not cost you advancement. It preserves that advancement from being eroded from within. Now, pray, Almighty God, I stand before you today not in the posture of a proud victor, but with the heart of one who has passed through more wounds than words can express. You know every moment I was attacked in silence, every look that distorted the truth, every word cloaked in kindness, yet carrying the intent to harm. I do not need to recount them, for you have seen it all. I do not need to prove anything, for heaven has recorded every detail. Lord, without your preserving hand, I would not still be standing here. Without your unseen protection, I would have collapsed in the days when I had to endure while pretending to be strong. I thank you that you did not allow me to be swallowed by things I did not cause, nor did you allow my soul to be defined by the malice of others. Today, I lay before you all the memories of those attacks, not to nurture bitterness, but to surrender judgment back into your hands. Please free me from the need to protect myself through resentment. Let my heart be at peace, knowing that your justice is never late. I trust that you preserved me, not merely so that I would survive, but so that I could move forward within your divine order. Lord, I thank you for the dark seasons I once did not understand. I thank you for the doors that did not open, the paths that were blocked, the silences that left me confused. At the time, I thought I had been left behind, but now I understand. You were holding me back to preserve my soul. Lord, please forgive me for the moments when I resented the delays, for the times I compared my journey to that of others. I could not see what you were doing in the darkness, yet you were working without ceasing. Grant me a humble heart to look back and recognize that in the very days I felt forgotten, you were laying the strongest foundation for me. Help me not to despise hidden seasons, not to fear quiet intervals, and not to doubt your presence simply because I do not see light immediately. I believe that without those dark seasons, I would not be steady enough to stand in the light I walk in today. O God of truth, I thank you that I did not have to speak up to vindicate myself. I thank you that truth rose on its own when heaven's timing came. Guard my heart from fleshly satisfaction when I see falsehood no longer standing. Do not let me rejoice over the downfall of others, but teach me to rejoice in my own liberation. Lord, I renounce every need to be understood, to be explained, to be validated by those who once believed what was distorted. Grant me enough peace to move forward without looking back. Help me not to remain bound to an old story simply because it has finally been exposed. I believe that your truth does not need noise to exist. Let me live in the light quietly yet firmly, so that my life itself becomes a testimony without the need for defense. Lord, I thank you for leading me out of a place of collapse before it happened. I thank you that I no longer stand on ground that is shaking, even though there was a time I believed it was the only place I belonged. Guard me from the temptation to look back at what is falling apart. Help me not to tie my worth to the failure of others. I do not want my peace to be built on anyone's ruin. I only want to stand firm in the place where you have set me. Lord, teach me this lesson deeply. Everything not built on truth will one day come to an end. Grant me the wisdom, from this day forward, to build only what can stand in the light of your presence. Loving Father, I come to you not asking to forget, but asking to be healed. Touch the places in me that have grown accustomed to strain and self-bracing. Dismantle the defensive reflexes I have carried for too long. Allow me to rest without guilt, to be gentle without fear of being harmed. Heal my memories so they no longer control my present. Heal the way I see myself, so I no longer view myself through the lens of past attacks. Restore my ability to trust the intuition you placed within me from the beginning. I believe that you do not merely bind wounds, but also teach me how to live without being led by them. Lord, I thank you that you have not only returned what was lost, but have given me something I never had before: inner freedom. Guard me from shrinking myself out of fear of losing again. Give me courage to dream without self-censorship, to receive without guilt. Teach me how to walk in abundance without clinging, how to give without depletion, and how to preserve what must be protected. Help me understand that blessing is not a reward for suffering, but a natural flow when I stand in the right place within your order. I receive this overflowing restoration not with pride, but with deep gratitude. Lord, if you lift me up, keep me from forgetting where I came from. Let me step into new positions with humility, not with the tension of having to hold my place, but with the trust that you yourself have placed me there. Help me use influence not to control, but to create safe space for truth. Teach me to say no when necessary, and to say yes when you open the way. Protect me from trading peace for achievement. I surrender this promotion back to you, so that it will not become a burden, but a means through which I may serve in order and in light. O God, I entrust my entire journey into your hands, from the days of attack to the seasons of preservation, through exposure, collapse, healing, restoration, and advancement. I do not want to carry anything you have already closed, nor do I want to step into what is new with an old posture of heart. Let me continue to walk with a heart that is soft yet with clear boundaries, with faith that is not naive but steadfast, with a peace that does not depend on circumstances. Use my story not for display, but to bring hope to those who are still in the darkness where I once stood. I believe that the best you have prepared for me is not behind me, but is unfolding step by step before me. I say amen not because everything is perfect, but because I know you are walking with me, and that is enough. I offer this prayer in the holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that together we may build a strong and growing community of faith.